Welcome to the Forest School podcast, where we explore the world of outdoor education and nature-based learning. I'm Lewis Ames, joined in the main part of the show by my co-host Wem Southerden. Today, we've got a fantastic and fascinating conversation with Emma Brox, a journalist who recently wrote an article about Forest School for The Guardian called "I'm All for the Concept of Forest School, Just Not the Kind I Pulled My Kids Out of." In the episode, we had a look at Emma's experience enrolling her children in a Forest School program, what drew her to it, and did it live up to her expectations? We looked at the marketing of Forest School in urban environments, looking at whether schools are feeling a pressure to offer something that they can't truly deliver, and the challenges of communicating the value of Forest School beyond just outdoor activities, how we can better explain this unique pedagogy. And now I want to take a moment to address our interview with Emma. We're aware that her article sparked various reactions within the Forest School community, all of which totally valid, totally understandable. Our decision to speak with Emma stemmed from a desire to gain an outsider's perspective, someone who fully, as we mentioned in the episode, does not have a vested interest in Forest School, no skin in the game. The conversation presented a unique opportunity to step outside of our Forest School positive echo chamber and get some potentially fresh insights. Wem and I did some prep for the episode, and we agreed that while it might have been tempting and maybe an initial response to respond defensively to some of the article or with a barrage of facts, we chose that we wanted to listen and reflect on Emma's experience with a kind of non-judgmental approach. We try and hold as much as we can. Our aim was to understand Emma's perception of Forest School as a concept and her specific experience with this one session. By engaging with this open dialogue, we hoped that we could gather valuable feedback and identify areas for improvement in how we as a community communicate and deliver Forest School experiences. We really hope that this approach can lead us to some constructive discussions and help us all grow as practitioners and as advocates for specifically Forest School education. So with some open minds and the spirit of curiosity, let's get into the episode.
We are really pleased to be here with Emma Brox. Emma, you are a journalist and have recently written an article about Forest School, quite a short article in The Guardian, which quite a few people in the Forest School community have read, and there's been quite a lot of really interesting debate and discussion around it. But just before we kind of get into that, could you tell us a little bit about your background as a journalist, what kind of things you usually write about, and where we can find your writing?
Sure. I write for The Guardian. Until recently, I was in New York for 17 years, writing about American politics, but also writing magazine pieces, interviews with writers and actors and celebrities. I just moved back to London in August, and I'll be doing exactly the same thing from here.
As well?
Yes, I've got twin 9-year-olds. Yeah.
Amazing. So we kind of want to start with the fact that you mentioned in the article that you are kind of pro the ethos and the ideas around Forest School, and you're quite supportive of it. Can you describe to us your initial ideas about Forest School and where and when you first heard about it, and what drew you to enrol your children in this Forest School program in the first place?
I have a feeling the first time I ever heard the phrase Forest School, and I'm sure I was massively behind the curve, as in so many contexts, was another Guardian writer, Patrick Barkham, who you might be familiar with, who's brilliant. And I think he lives in Norfolk with his twins. And he was, by my standards, quite an early adopter of putting his kids, I think, in quite what looked to me to be quite hardcore Forest School compared to the London-based offerings that have since been introduced. And I remember thinking, first of all, oh, I would have hated that as a kid because I didn't like getting wet. And then I thought about it a bit longer and I thought, actually, no, hang on a minute. I wouldn't have hated it. I think I would have loved it. Anyway, I had a back and forth in my own brain about this. And then I didn't have cause to think about it for years. It's not quite on the radar in New York schools. I mean, there's Central Park, but there's less access to green spaces generally in New York than there is in Greater London. And as I said in the piece, they're much more hung up on Mandarin
Yeah.
as the add-on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then there was a confluence of two things. We moved back to London, and in the spring, I had calls to go on lots of tours of London primary schools, and it was very apparent to me that since I had last lived in this country, that Forest School had just become an almost universal bolt-on to a certain type of primary school in North London that was definitely trying to attract a middle-class parenting body. And some of the providers, it was quite credible because there was a big park right next door. And then there were other schools where I really felt for them because I thought it felt to me as if these were schools who, for marketing reasons that are completely legitimate, had tried to create a forest school where it was almost impossible to do so in a corner of a concrete playground, and that this isn't what forest school is. And then that sort of made me think about how that term was being used and the power that it now has. And then, because I am seduced by the whole idea of it, I put my girls in forest school in a park in London, and I think we were unlucky with the provider. It was baloney. I mean, these kids were sitting on the floor, or sitting around, not being engaged for most of the day. It didn't do any of the things that it promised to do. And so I was just curious about those two things. I thought it's become so appealing now that that term is now being abused, I think, because it's catnip, isn't it?
Keeping the Forest School podcast running takes a lot of work, and we need your help to make it sustainable. By supporting us on patreon.com/the Forest School podcast, you're directly contributing to the future of this podcast. If you're enjoying our episodes, please consider becoming a member today at patreon.com/the Forest School podcast.
That's what we wanted to sort of talk about. Absolutely, yeah. So you're sort of talking about the, Mandarin lessons in New York kind of being like a seductive, catnipy thing for parents, and we're kind of interested in why we might think forest school is that catnip thing for a certain group of parents. Like, why do you think that is? What's your kind of take on that?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because in a way, forest school acts in completely the inverse way to what Mandarin is doing. Mandarin is supposed in a New York setting. Mandarin is supposed to make your child more competitive in the jobs market. Assuming that China continues to rise, and it's an academic pursuit that will look really fancy when they're applying to Harvard or whatever. Forest school, the ethos of forest school is in the other direction, in that it might have enormous emotional benefits for them, but it doesn't. It's not something that burnishes a CV. It doesn't foster skill. I mean, it could. I mean, I can see that there's an argument for it fostering useful team building and survival skills.
It's not a direct line, is it? In that way that Mandarin is like, you do Mandarin and then you put Mandarin on the CV, whereas Forest School is in that, like, if I was going to put, like, I'm going to put the biggest air quotes in the world for people listening to this, in the, like, soft skills department, it's like I did a music degree, and they spent the whole time I did my music degree being like, you're not going to do music, but you are going to learn this skill and this skill and this skill. And I feel like Forest School fits in that kind of realm where it's like, directly, it doesn't go linearly. Did Forest School, put 8 years of Forest School on your CV, but some of the hope is that it will have all these other, oh God, I'm going to use the air quotes again, soft benefits to an individual as a human being.
Yes, and don't you think the two things are related to the extent that it keys into an anxiety that we all have, that the pendulum has swung too much in the direction of utility, right? That we are forcing our children to be these tiny adults. I mean, the schedules in Manhattan for 9-year-olds are just, extraordinary. And Forest School is a rebuke to that in ethos, it feels to me. Like, let's just let them go, have unstructured time, looking at wood. But the thing is, what's fascinating about this is that I do find myself thinking, wait, did I overreact? Because maybe that day in Forest School was precisely what it's supposed to be, which is unstructured time without somebody coordinating activities for them. Because there is a bit of you that still thinks, well, what are they learning? Why can't she now tie a knot? I thought that's what. Where's the takeaway? Like, how am I going to measure the value of this experience. And I think that's probably the wrong metric, right?
It's not. I think wrong is a, because you don't want to say like how the needs that people have are like right or wrong. Do you know what I mean? Like that's a need that someone might have in their particular social circle or their particular like upbringing means that that's the stuff they value, or like the world that they're looking at for their children means that that's a value they've got. I think it's interesting to reflect on, like as a forest school community, reflecting on, and I think the article really hit this really well, is like that interesting point of like, well, how is it being advertised, and if it is going to say it's one thing, should it be that thing? Because I know some people will do and are very proud of what they call forest school by stealth, where they basically do the thing that you're describing, where they say, I go into, maybe not holiday clubs, but they talk about, I go into schools and I sell the school that I'm going to do X, Y, Z. And then when I get in, I let the kids sit around and they get all the, and they, you know, they've got this, like, I give them the mental health benefits and I let them follow the thing. And it's, some people are very proud of doing that thing by stealth, but then sort of acknowledging that then that is creating a disconnect between what you're oh god, the air quotes are really flying today, selling, and then what you're delivering, you know?
Yes, I can see that. I guess from a sort of punter's perspective, I don't entirely understand what my expectations should have been. Like, I'm happy for my kids to spend a day in the park. So then what's the problem? They did do that. I mean, there's a price point issue as well, which is definitely, there was gouging going on, I would say. It's not too strong a word for it. But then again, if what's being delivered is happiness. I mean, we're talking about happiness, aren't we? This is what, like, all the studies show, don't they, that time spent outdoors, particularly as a young person, is a fairly reliable delivery system for happiness.
Hey, did you know you can become part of the Forest School Podcast community by joining us over on patreon.com/the Forest School Podcast? You'll get exclusive access to behind the scenes content, have a chance to connect with us and with other listeners. Head over to our Patreon at patreon.com/the Forest School Podcast to find out more about what we're offering over there.
They weren't happy though. They were quite complaining at the end of the day.
Yeah, and
I was going to ask about that, because that's not in the article, and I was like,
No.
did you leave that out for a reason? Was that something that you were like, that needs more reflection? Is that like, you know, they
can't
didn't ask to
remember.
be in an article?
It might have been like a really vain effort to protect their privacy, even though that ship sailed long ago, because I've just put them in too many columns now. But they were fine. I mean, they're pretty stoical, but they were just a bit taken aback because, like I said, I probably oversold it, but I was like, I was so entranced by this idea of forest school. I was like, this is going to be like amazing. You're going to be outside all day. If it rains, it doesn't matter if you get really dirty, you know, all the stuff that, you know, runs counter to fussy modern parenting. And you're going to learn, okay, the knot tying baffled everybody, but like, you know, to identify, they are interested in ecology and, you know, identify leaves and all that stuff. And just none of that happened. And it really felt like a piss take. They were, for a solid 4 hours in the afternoon, they were sitting in a clearing and just, you know, there was nothing to do. So they were a bit puzzled, and they were also like, we don't want to go back tomorrow.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Yeah. And you've got to listen to that, haven't you? You've got to listen to your children's experience. And
yes.
I mean, we try to be with the people that come to visit us. If they do then go, I'm actually not going to come back, like, we try to go, do you know what, we honestly don't try to claim that forest school is for everybody, or even if you don't like our provision, you might like somebody else's. That it's such a sort of personal thing, that the forest school delivery is so dependent on the site and the people who are delivering it, and you put so much of yourself as a practitioner into it in terms of your own skill set and your own interests, you know, whether you're into music and storytelling like we might be, or whether you come from a more ecology background and, you know, IDing is your thing or whatever. So the differences can be so great between these different provisions.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It must be, because of course there's just going to be a spectrum of great forest schools and then very average ones. But plenty of my friends, a friend of mine just sent her twin 14-year-olds to, I think it's quite well, it's a forest school that happens every year, and they go, and like it's residential, they're away for a week in different.
Sorry, I need to ask, do you only hang around with people with other twins?
Yeah.
Is this
Twin club?
I not to sorry to derail this, but is this a
No, it's really weird. It's properly weird. Yeah. I mean, I guess we
Okay.
just clock each other, but it is odd. Yeah.
Okay,
But they've
sorry.
had great time. And so I was going to say, I've signed up to get on the waiting list for that forest school, and now I'm worried because of that article that they're going to recognise me and think that I'm hostile to the project, and I'm not going to get in.
Oh.
So I don't know.
I'm sure.
Well, if it's anything I don't know how much, if anything, has like got back to you, but a lot of what I have seen is people eager to show what they do
Yeah.
is not in that
Yeah.
description, and I think look, this is going to be like devil's advocate. There will be people listening to this that are going to be like, fuck this, Lewis, I hate them, turn them off, right? But I think it is a reality check that any community needs to have every now and again, to go like, hey, just so you're not always preaching to the choir, here's an outside perspective of how it's come across. Because otherwise you can just go really, really insular, and you can kind of I did wonder, one of the things that I wanted to ask Emma was, so you mentioned that you had possibly oversold it to your kids. Had they had any experience of what was called forest school, or had they had any experience of anything similar before that? What was their kind of like run up to it,
I'm just trying to think. They hadn't. It's partly because, again, the summers in New York are so hostile. You cannot have young kids out in 95-degree weather. It's just you can't. And there's less infrastructure. But they had, when we'd been doing the school tours, one of the schools that had a quite impressive forest school, it was like one whole afternoon a week in a really, they were really excited about that. Like they could see what it could be, and it was off-site. It wasn't in the school. It wasn't a corner of the playground. And that looked amazing, and they were really into that. And we actually, for various reasons, we ended up not going to that school, and they were quite disappointed. So they did have this, and the thing is, I think, we were just in the Isle of Wight for a week, and we were outside all day for the whole week. I mean, they are happy to walk 5 miles up and down cliff edges. Like, I think the problem was that there was no movement. It was very stationary, and they couldn't understand what it was. And I think that was just a bad provision. Because they love being outside all day. Yeah.
We quite often talk with our so Wem and I have both experienced this thing, that this is a bit like inside baseball, but like as practitioners, like we're all aware of this thing of like, what are you even doing? What are you even offering? And so like when you're like, I'm offering, I know what I'm offering. And so Wem and I often talk about this thing of like over communicating what you're doing, so like we will sometimes sidle up next to, if we're doing schoolwork, you sidle up next to the class teacher that's come out, and you sort of point out what you're seeing and go, oh, have you noticed that person's really picked up on that thing? Or, they're talking to that person. And so you're putting your knowledge onto the stuff that's happening, so that if there's anybody nearby, think potentially, sometimes it's just about your own anxiety about going like, fuck, they're watching me and I need to look. And sometimes that also happens with like our holiday provision isn't forest school because it's not long term, doesn't meet all those principles. But there are times where when parents are doing pickup or whatever else, you're like, I'm gonna get ahead of the game here slightly because I know how this might go home, and so I'm gonna like articulate all the things that I did see, the legitimate, like they did this and I noticed they felt like this, and so I put this in place and all of that stuff. So this is full devil's advocate, right? But do you think there is a hypothetical something that forest school provision could have said or articulated that would have changed your view of the afternoon? I realize you've said now like the kids weren't super into it and there was other things. That's something that I feel like I need to ask, like that's my hypothetical.
I don't know. I mean, it's hard because how with everything, it's just 50% of it is like vibe.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I could just, something felt off. I could feel that there was, and look, it could, they'd been going all summer. This was quite late in the season. It was a very hot day. There was a bunch of factors that could have meant they were having an off day. And I do think the pressure, if you're representing an entire spectrum of things that, a lot of people don't have experience of, there's not, and also if you've got a price point that's that high, you're just, you don't have a lot of leeway. So I don't think there's a lot they could have done. I mean, yeah, they were, my kids reported back, not with any great indignation, but again, they were slightly taken aback that there were berries being picked, but there was no indication of what they were. There was no, it would have been so easy to just, not that I need them to learn anything, but like, what are you doing? First of all, you shouldn't just be randomly picking berries and then not communicating what that is.
Yeah.
They're London berries. They grow in London.
And then, it was who picked the biggest berry competition. And one of my daughters who how can I characterize it in a not negative way, but she's quite sort of opinionated, said to me, I decided not to submit my berry. That was her review of the whole day, basically. She did not submit her berry, which I understand, having on many occasions not submitted my own berry.
Yeah.
I did some berry picking with a group. It was a while ago now, but it was with a group, and there was someone who I think their family might have shopped at Waitrose, because we were going around picking blackberries, and they were unhappy with the size of every single blackberry, and they were like, they should be about this big, I think, Lewis. And I was going, you're going to be here for a fucking long time, bud, because they do not grow like that.
Yeah.
By top win, yeah. But I have a question for you guys, which is like, I feel, there's definitely, particularly for urban dwellers, there's a sort of, there's a nostalgia built in, which is that we all feel that our childhoods are not achievable for our own kids. We want them to have free reign. They don't spend enough time outdoors, and we are raising them in these intensely pressurized environments where they're like battery hens. And there's something sad in a way about the hopes that we pin on this one mechanism to do the job of a million different agencies and somehow make us feel whole again.
Yeah.
You just do childhood. Do childhood in an hour or two. Just do that.
Exactly. Like make it Swallows and Amazons and make us feel better about everything. I don't know how you meet that expectation. It's almost impossible.
Yeah, it's and it's something I think, I'm sure I'm not alone as a practitioner in also feeling a bit weird about that, because I had a childhood like that, which if I describe it, even like Lewis is 10 years younger than me, and sometimes I describe my childhood, and Lewis, you're a bit like, you
were feral.
I didn't do that.
Like, your childhood was
normal. It was normal for where I grew up and when I grew up.
Not by my yardstick.
To be doing all this stuff outside and like super risky stuff and like, nicking stuff out of scrapyards and...
Hey everybody, we've got some exciting things planned exclusively for our Patreon supporters over at patreon.com/The Forest School Podcast. If you want more in-depth discussions, bonus episodes and other exclusive content, head over to our Patreon and support the podcast. You won't want to miss it. Patreon.com/The Forest School Podcast.
Building sites, and it wasn't even like rural idyll, do you know what I mean? It was like nicking stuff, mixing our own concrete and building sites and all this kind of stuff, which was brilliant, like so good. And so when I kind of moved from being a teacher in school to a forest school practitioner, there was a lot of guilt that I carried in terms of, I'm being paid to try to give people's children a taste of what my own childhood was like, and that should be free and people shouldn't have to pay for that. And I'm essentially working in a private sector now, coming from the state school system where I'm, interacting with hundreds of children a week. And now I'm just in this tiny place, this beautiful woodland, and I'm working with a small amount of children and, for a short amount of time. And obviously I'm trying to give them as great an experience as I can, but I still just felt this real guilt that people shouldn't have to pay for this, It's so I completely see what you're saying. And I kind of feel like You described Forest School as having this place of, is, you know, for some children this is the only place that they can experience anything like that kind of freedom that a lot of us had in our own childhood, and for that reason it should be very valued and very important
Yeah.
and really good quality. You know, it should be respected, really kind of valued for what it is, and which for me primarily is the play element. You know, the play outdoors and
Yes.
that
Yeah.
being so important. So I think with our long-term communities, so we do 2 days a week with home educated children, and some of them are with us for years and years, and that feels like, yeah, true forest school. And even with our, you know, our family groups that we have, which is about adults coming with their young people and trying to deliver for both age groups, you know, for the adults and the children, and help people connect with nature, which you hope maybe people take away with them and be able to, you know, use some of that knowledge or that approach. So I kind of do feel the responsibility of that. And I guess you just have to come to a place where you think, well, you know, we can try and do the best that we can. And that's one of the reasons we do the podcast. I think Lewis probably agree, in terms of sharing the difficulties or the like questions that we've had, so that forest school practitioners and parents can listen to it and go, oh, do you know what? That's an interesting point. Maybe I'll think about that. And maybe that will influence my practice or approach. Yeah.
I remember, but when I back that resonates with me because I remember when I read Patrick's piece all those years ago, thinking it's so. This sounds an old-fashioned thing to say, but it sounded so radical when he talked about it, which is wild, right? I mean, I was like, that's what do you mean that they're like outside learning? That's crazy, and you still want it to retain a bit of that, right? Like that it's such a departure from every norm. And I guess the difficulty is like this one school, which was in inner city London that we went to, and I felt so sympathetic towards the administration there. They understood the pressure to come up with some kind of forest school-esque thing, and it wasn't even a corner of the playground where there were some pot plants. It was literally a lean-to, which pushed up against the side of the building with some plastic chairs and tables in it, and they did one class a week, and one wall was missing. It made no sense. I mean, it's an outdoor classroom, not in the sense that Forest School, I'm sure, intends it. It's literally you've taken some chairs and tables and put them in a lean-to.
Yeah.
It just it's that's when I thought, gosh, this as a marketing tool, it's gone
It's
crazy.
interesting that in that level, isn't it? The like the sort of performative display case kind of side of those things. I think I would be interested to say, personally, I think that the way that the forest school movement survives is if they were Venn diagrams and there's like woodland activities, those fit a lot of them in forest school, but because it's this like other pedagogy, it's this whole way of learning and this approach to relationships and this whatever else, and like you can do that in, you know, in somebody's garden as much as you could do it in like, you know, Central Park, or you could do it in like the Rocky Mountains and we've got 400 acres to go, you know, play with kids. But the more that the and it's never, as to my experience, it's never really the needs of practitioners, it's the needs of, like you say, schools, senior leadership teams to have this thing. And so the focus becomes on like what looks good on the website. Okay, it's the woodland activity bits because they're short, they're easy to explain, whereas to go like, hey, would you like to hear about the way in which the leaders approach the children's social and emotional needs during it, like you've already signed out and gone
Right,
you know.
interesting. Yeah.
And so I would personally say that the more, and I think that would be interesting, the better we can get as a community at communicating. This is why I'm really like pleased to be able to speak to you as someone that's like, in the nicest way possible, not got skin in the game. Do you know what I mean? You know, to go, this is full feedback that we can go, what we've got to get better at is communicating the pedagogy and less the Instagram picture. That's very like, you know, I'm swinging for the fences here, right? Like these are some controversial things to say, and there's obviously nuances to all of this. But I think so. Well, as a parent, how would that have fitted with you? Like, do parents because we were talking at the start about this kind of middle class badges of honor and the needs that you have in different social circles or for whatever reason. Do you think pedagogies meet those needs in the same way, or are they just not as demonstrable, and so they're just never going to meet that need?
I don't know. I mean,
Sorry, I asked 19 questions in one. That's how I tend to talk.
I think, look, as you say, the problem that I had with the presentation of that particular approach in that school was that if they'd have said, we just put them outside because it's nice for them to have a bit of extra fresh air, it would have been fine. When they started banding the word forest school around, it immediately makes you want to say, do you think we're idiots? Like that, it doesn't need to be relevant. But that is not like, I don't know, I don't know much about the forest school history, but I do know that is not really fitting the bill. I mean, it's nice for them to be outside for extra recess. I mean, in terms of what it delivers, I don't know. Well, it's interesting coming out from the New York school system, because there's a big debate over there about whether social emotional learning has been emphasised at the expense. Now there's a big backlash that there's too much social emotional, and why can't they do more maths? Right?
Oh, okay.
That conversation is going on even at the same time as everyone's worried that their kids are all going to be on antidepressants when they're 15 because there's too much pressure on them. So
that COVID backlash didn't last long. We had a real backlash about mental health was like top priority for about 6 months after lockdowns. And then the second the schools were back open, it was like, cool, catch up time, everybody. Double maths for you.
What are the results? Exactly right. So I don't know. I don't know whether there are... I don't know what people think it's giving them in terms of learning. Like what other words could be said that don't require a marketing tool that might not necessarily fit the description of what's going to happen. I don't know. They're in a school now that doesn't have, interestingly, actually it does, but not in their grade. There's a forest school thing further down the school. And they were quite disappointed because they really got the hopes up that they would be in a park. But I don't know. I think it's just so much of it is that they're just not outside enough. I mean, it's such a basic thing to say, and that I'm sure that undersells all the skills that you need to derive maximum value out of a natural setting, but they're just not outside enough, these kids, most of the time.
And I think
that's very valid, isn't it?
And I think the approach that some schools have towards forest school, like the one you described, also is very damaging for, not only in terms of maybe it's simply there as a marketing thing to lure parents, and it's not very truthful, and it's not great for the kids. It's also obviously not great for the practitioners. In kind of discussion groups online for forest school practitioners, just today somebody was saying that they've had to leave their job and just walked out because they've arrived back after the summer, and the school have cut down half of the trees. They've just stripped the site. They've just, because the school doesn't, that clearly shows the school doesn't really understand what the value is, and all of this stuff. So I don't know if there's a solution to it.
I was going to ask Emma, with your kind of view as outside perspective on this. There's lots of internal debates in the forest school world about certifications, regulations, award, gold star for this forest school, well, this one doesn't meet the thing. Do you think that would things like that be something that parents would then look at and value, or is that something that is always going to be vibes based? It's always going to be, you could have all the tick boxes in the world kind of thing.
Oh, I'm sure parents would value it. I mean, look, everyone loves a league table, don't they? Look at the school system in London, and what's just happened with Ofsted, banning the one word. Look at the disaster that can lead us to when we overvalue certification, or in any industry, in the restaurant industry, where people are led to ruinous places because so much emphasis is put on external sort of competition. I mean, I'm sure a bit of that would help. I don't know. I honestly don't know enough. I mean, you guys would know how the negative side of that would hamstring you if it was. It would just depend entirely on what hoops you were made to jump through and whether they were remotely sensible. But having looked at what the school system as a whole has been dragged through, I wouldn't have any particular confidence that a body, quasi-government or otherwise, was able to nail a standard that was meaningful to people who knew what they were talking about.
That's a really good point. Oh, thank you so much, Emma, for joining us. Yeah, we could kind of chat about this for
It's my
ages,
pleasure.
but,
I'm sorry I was late. Sorry, but I'm glad we got to talk.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I am. We are going to have another crack at it because I am.
Oh, that's what I was going to ask.
Great, yeah. It was good to hear they were interested in the school that did offer forest school. Clearly, it didn't.
Yes.
Their negative experience hasn't killed their joy forever.
No,
Right.
I want them to go. I want them to have. When I was a kid, everyone did Duke of Edinburgh, right? And again, to put it on their CVs, it was the motivation was sort of, asked about it. But anyway, it did involve trudging through Derbyshire in the pouring rain, and I'm damned if I'm going to have them miss out on that experience. So we'll revisit for sure.
Oh, amazing. Oh, I hope it goes well, and I hope they have lots of positive experiences in the future.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was lovely to talk to you guys.
And you. Thank you so much, mate.
Take care.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
And that wraps up another episode of the Forest School podcast. Huge thanks again to Emma for chatting with us. We covered a lot of ground, from the challenges of delivering authentic forest school experiences in urban settings to the importance of trying to communicate this deeper pedagogical aspects of forest school. Thank you to everybody that sent questions and comments in on Patreon ahead of this episode and in our direct messages. We would love to hear your thoughts on today's discussion. If you fancy dropping us a message, you can head over to theforestschoolpodcast.com and share your feedback and thoughts over there. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or a colleague or somebody who might be interested in forest school. Until next time, stay wonky.